Well, local council voting has closed, with the last of the votes going into the mail this afternoon. But a lot of people have been asking me, how does the Electoral Commission count the votes and how do they decide who gets to fill the vacancies on council? So I thought I'd put together this quick video explanation. In this election, all of the wards that we're covering have multiple vacancies. So the question a lot of people have is, how do you get from the numbers on the ballot paper, as we see on the screen there, to the elected members? The answer is that it all starts with a magic number, which is called a quota. The quota is the number of votes that are required to be elected. So when there's one vacancy, you need to have 50% of the votes plus one extra vote to be elected. It's called an absolute majority. When there's two vacancies, like for example in Windermere Ward, you need to have 33.33% of the votes plus one. For 3 vacancies like Brownbill Ward, 25% plus 1. And for 7 vacancies like in Golden Plains, you would need 12.5% plus 1. The quota is calculated by taking the number of formal votes, then dividing it by 1 more than the number of vacancies, and then adding 1 to the overall result. So now that we know what the quota is, let's go to an actual counting scenario. In this scenario, imagine we've got a ward, it's got 3 vacancies, and 100 formal votes have come through, and there's 5 candidates running. What we first do is take all of the ballot papers and allocate them to candidates based on who the voter put as number 1 on their ballot paper. This is called the primary vote. So in this case, we can see candidate A got 32 primary votes, meaning that 32 people put candidate A as number 1. Candidate B only got 4 primary votes, meaning only 4 people put that candidate as number 1 on their ballot paper, and so on. Next to each candidate, I've got 3 numbers. I've got the number of votes they received, I've then got the percentage of the overall vote that they got, and then last of all, I've got the number of quotas that that particular candidate received. So as we can see, the quota is 26 votes. You need 26 votes to be elected, and candidate A got 32 of the votes. Therefore, they've got 1.23 quotas. Candidate B only has 0.15 quotas. This can be a useful statistic to see how close each candidate is to being elected in their own right. Now, because candidate A has 26 or more of the votes, that's the quota, they're elected straight away, which fills the first vacancy. So we can see here, candidate A is green, and they're now the first candidate to be elected. And there's 2 vacancies remaining. Now, candidate A has 6 more votes than they actually need to be elected. So they've got 32 votes, but really they only needed 26 to be elected. So that the votes aren't wasted, their surplus votes, 6 votes, are transferred over to the candidate that the voter put as number 2 on their ballot paper. Now, it's not possible to know which exact votes are the surplus and which ones got the candidate elected in the first place. So all 32 votes are transferred, but they're transferred at a reduced rate, which is called a transfer value. This is where it gets probably the most complicated, and that is, to work out the transfer value, we take 32 divided by 26, which is 1.23, and so on. So the transfer value there is 0.23. So each vote essentially for candidate A, when we transfer it on, is only worth 23% of what it once was. So hypothetically, if let's say 6 of the ballots that went to candidate A had candidate B as second, when we take that reduced rate of 23%, that only means that 1 vote would move over to candidate B. So let's do that. Let's move all the votes around, and here is the new standing after we've transferred all of candidate A's votes over. You'll notice if you add up all of the votes that there's now only 74 votes in the system, because 26 votes have been parked away over with candidate A, who has already been elected. Now we go to the next stage of the count, and you'll see that nobody here has 26 votes. So we now need to exclude the candidate that has the lowest number of votes. When we take a candidate out of the count, their ballots go to the candidate with number 2 on the voter's ballot. Or if that was, say, candidate A, they would go to number 3. So they go to the next person on that ballot paper who is still in the race. So now that we've distributed all of the excluded candidates' ballot papers to the next candidates, we can see here that there's 2 candidates that have 26 votes or more. That would be candidate D and candidate E. Candidates D and E are now elected because they've both got 26 votes or more, and they're elected in the order of highest to lowest number of votes. So we can see there candidate E is elected into position 2 and candidate D into position 3. And now the last vacancies have been filled, so candidate C misses out. And that is a pretty simple scenario of how you get from 5 candidates down to 3 vacancies using this system of voting. Now, of course, on the actual election day, it's a lot more complicated because there's a lot more votes to count than 100, and also there's a lot more people that are running for the same number of vacancies. But you can see in practice how this would play out. If you're interested in learning more about this process, I've got an election calculator on my website that lets you simulate different scenarios. You can go to mitchellsfrontpage.com/election calculator. The calculator is a bit more of a simplified version of the actual count, so there's a few things that it does slightly differently to make it a little bit easier to follow, but it's still useful for predicting different scenarios. One of the main things the calculator does is that it assumes that all of the voters who vote 1 for someone fill out their ballots with the rest of the numbers exactly the same way. Of course, that doesn't happen in the real world, but it would just be far too complicated to really simulate that through a calculator. So this is what the election calculator looks like. All you have to do is to click on the ward that you would like to simulate. So in this situation, I'm going to simulate Brownbill ward. And then we see this page where I've got all of the candidates and I go through and I can fill out what percentage of the vote they will get, and also I can number the other candidates on their ballot paper. And then I can run the numbers by clicking calculate result, and the calculator will determine who would be elected. And you can play out some very interesting scenarios. Like, for example, it is possible for one of the candidates to get the highest number of primary votes but still not be elected. And we've seen that in different elections around the state over the years. There's also 3 interesting buttons which may help you with using the calculator. The first one says autofill preferences. If you click on that button, it will fill out all of the preferences for each of the candidates for you, using a combination of random but also some historical preference flow data to indicate where that voter's preferences are likely to go. There's also autofill last election primary vote, where if a candidate or party has run previously in the 2016 or 2017 elections, the calculator will put in the vote that that person got, the percentage automatically for you, just saving a bit of time if you want to resimulate what happened last time. And if you hit random election, the system will simply fill out all of the numbers automatically and spit out a result. So you just hit random election to see a random simulation of what might happen, which can be sometimes a lot of fun. Finally, my website will continue to be updated as we get results that come through from the count, and that'll be both scrutineers and the VEC. So this is a sample results page on the website where you'll be able to track all of the different candidates who are elected, the percentage of the vote that each candidate gets, the number of quotas, and so on. So you get a lot more statistics and information here than what is available on other websites and the VEC. Thank you very much for all of your interest in the campaign, and I put together this video in response to questions about how the votes are counted. Hopefully you found it informative.
Mitchell's Front Page with Mitchell Dye. Mondays and Tuesdays from 9 till 11 on 94.7 The Pulse.